Quite a splash yesterday when the Surgeon General said he wants Congress to put a warning label on social media apps, similar to the warning labels we see on cigarettes and alcohol.
The Surgeon General says Congress is passing warning label legislation could decline by using this. For more on the label, let's turn to 9 News health expert Dr. Payal Kohli. I didn't get that out correctly. Let's just talk about a label here. How effective could a label be, like a label?
It's interesting. It actually is quite effective. We get our precedent really from the tobacco epidemic, where we saw that putting a label on substantially reduced the rates of tobacco use because many people weren't aware. So I think it's the most effective in terms of awareness, less effective at inciting behavioral change, actually getting people to change their behaviors based on it. But a lot of us, parents included, may not realize the harms of social media, and that's really what Dr. Murthy is trying to do here.
It really could affect the way app makers build their apps, because we see it in films all the time now where they don't want an R rating, so they take out certain scenes or modify them so that they can be available to more people. Apps might go that same route where they have to be made available. They don't want the warning label.
Well, it's so interesting that you bring that up because the warning labels, not all warning labels are created equal. And not all, as you said, apps could change how they're behaving to avoid the warning label. But if they do have to have a warning label, whether it's text or graphics can have a different impact. So for example, a graphic label is much more effective. The size of the label is much more effective. And in fact, the tobacco lobby did something similar. They lobbied against putting a picture of diseased lungs on a pack of cigarettes because that was so much more effective than just saying tobacco causes cancer.
Jarring, yeah.
Exactly. And how clearly the label is written. So tobacco causes cancer. I mean, that is clear as day. So if it just says, oh, social media may cause harm, especially because the research is still a little bit evolving, that's much more nebulous.
So when we talk about that, the science behind this research, I mean, we hear the stories day in, day out about bullying and suicide and things like that, but what is the science? What does it tell us?
The science tells us, in my opinion, my interpretation of the science is that excess consumption of social media, which we know 95% of teens are on social media, and a third of them admit to constantly checking social media, leads to an increased association with depression, with suicidality, with substance abuse, with anxiety, and with problems with social interaction. Now, this is just their behavior. We haven't even started to think about the effects on their brain development, the effects on their long-term cardiovascular risk, because when you're sitting on social media, you're not exercising.
Sleep,
exactly.
Like sitting there late at night, all that.
Scrolling, stimulating their retinas, and then also in their kind of academic performance. How well are they doing in school because they're on social media instead of doing their homework and getting their sleep?
You talk about some of the physical pieces of this. I mean, the role of the Surgeon General, we tend to think is about things that are toxic or poisonous or bad for you physically. I think most of what we're talking about here is your mental state, your emotional state, and the role of the Surgeon General jumping into that. Is this new?
It is new, and if you know more about Dr. Murthy's platform, he talks a lot about loneliness as well, and he talks a little bit about how this fits into that loneliness epidemic that has been his platform. Certainly in the medical community, we do want to focus on mental health, particularly our adolescents, but I also think, to your point, Tom, there is a lot of other medical issues within the healthcare community that this excess social media consumption and just the change in how we interact with each other is going to lead to down the line that we need to be aware of.
Has he seen support? Will he get support?
I suspect that he will, because this is an issue that both parties are really probably going to agree on. Now, the tech companies are really pushing back on this. And of course, there's this freedom of speech, First Amendment right, that you have to have your freedom of speech, and we're limiting freedom of speech. But in my mind, a label doesn't limit freedom of speech. It just cautions you. Now, it's your choice whether you want to consume it. I also think that just putting a label on is not going to be enough. If you think about when I was a teenager, I remember this, just say no to drugs. I remember this is your brain and this is your brain on drugs.
Right.
20 years later, I still remember those messages because they were so provocative. So it needs to be within the context of a larger public health campaign. It needs to be within the context of regulation of the tech companies and accountability so that they're providing metrics as to who's using their social media, how they're performing in school. Those types of research needs to be funded so that we can continue to evolve this message and do it in a safe way.
Well, now it'll go to Congress, and that's always a smooth operation.
Yeah,
so shouldn't be a problem.
because, you know, politics doesn't use social media at all.
Just glide on by.
But that's a really key point. I will be interested to see what their messaging will be. And thank you, Dr. Kohli.
Yes, but I'm so glad that the healthcare community is now thinking about all the things that we do, all the toxins that we consume, so to speak, and social media being one of those most prominent toxins.
Good to see you. Thanks,
Interesting. Doctor. Okay, you can always find more with Dr. Kohli at 9news.com/Dr. Kohli.